we use graphs in general for two purposes. They show the relationships between two variables. Now let me say, this is an important thing to say, this is what I tell my classes. Graphs are your friends. No, just like those of us who have had dogs and cats, and we know people who are afraid of dogs and cats until they get to know them. People can be afraid of graphs till they get to know them. And once they learn, well, this is how graphs act, just like this is how a German Shepherd acts, then they begin to get a little bit more into it and realize that the graphs, if you treat them well, won't bite you. A graph is a picture that tells a story. In simple words, a graph is a picture that tells a story. In my introductory economics classes at Wheaton, I begin talking about graphs by talking about comic strips, because those are also pictures that tell stories. And just like we learn the language of comic strips so that we understand what stars above a person's head mean, and they indicate pain for some reason, or asterisks and exclamation points designate our language. We learn what those mean. Those aren't things that are automatic. And so we can also, just as we learn that language from a picture that tells a story, we can also learn graphs as another form of picture that tells a story. Now, graphs show relationships between two variables. In some cases, graphs say that one thing causes another. In other cases, though, and in this particular case, it's not that one causes the other, it's that one corresponds with or is associated with each other. And so, in such cases, when there's not a direct causative relationship, when we take a look at what this graph means, we need to be aware that we kind of need to open up the graph and look at what's behind it that is driving everything else. So what is the dynamic behind the scenes, and what does it mean? This is a graph that is talking about the relationship of output to cost, and indicates that as output increases, moving along this way, costs decline. Now, why would that be the case? Well, because, let me add one other thing. Short run means we're operating within a framework in which you're not changing the equipment or machinery that you have. You're not changing the capital, as we economists would say. So the thing that you are changing is labor. Now, why would an increase in output lead to cost savings if we're increasing labor? Well, because if you add more people, you can organize work differently. That's what's behind this. If you add more people, you can organize work differently. Division of labor makes production more efficient, and specialization increases skills and increases speed also. So even with no change in capital equipment, no change in machinery and equipment, greater production is associated with lower costs through the dynamics of the organization of work, through the dynamics of how you organize your work. And that's the reason why we have a downward sloping short-run average cost curve. Now, up to a point. After that point, if we keep on adding people, well, people can begin to get in each other's way. I don't know if you've been in workplaces that were so crowded that things became inefficient. I certainly have. And so the average cost, what it costs to produce something, can actually begin to go up after a while. If you have a small office and you put 30 different people in there, so they're bumping into each other, you're actually producing. You can actually lose the savings that you're making for each product, each item that you make. Okay, so that's why the curve is shaped in this way. So there's downward sloping as output increases, and you know now that the key thing is to look behind this output increase and to think about additional people coming in, and then it's upward sloping. So what happens in terms of external economies and external diseconomies and how they influence short and average cost curves. External economies, by the way, we call agglomeration economies in urban economics. I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. But let's think about this point right here. And this is indicating that at this output level, there's a certain cost that is involved. Now, what lies underneath that cost? What is it that takes us from this level of cost up to there? Well, there are labor costs such as wages, recruitment, training, there's supplies, there's advertising. All of those things are part of the cost of production. There's the cost of research and development, of finding people. And the key thing about external economies is that they can reduce some of these factors and thus lead to the short-run average cost curve. Let's begin with this one in the middle. It can lead to a short-run average cost curve beginning at a lower level. How can it do this? Well, agglomeration economies refer to lower cost due to things being in close proximity. Now, a way in which labor can be affected and recruitment of labor in particular is that it can make it easier to find people if there are more businesses like yours being located in the same place. We refer to similar businesses being located close to each other as localization economies. We may find that in a situation like Boston, where there are a number of hospitals, that the cost of hospital supplies may go down simply because of the volume of goods that are being delivered to this area. We may find that it's easier to advertise, such as the situation at Automat, where businesses may not advertise individually, but may pool their resources and advertise as a group. So for a lot of reasons, you lower the cost of production. You can then sell your product at a cheaper price. More people buy. The market area for the good increases. Production increases. Your cities grow. Similarly, there can be diseconomies of scale under some circumstances, such as congestion, when cities become too big. And in such situations, you may have a shift of the short-run average cost curve upwards, indicating that you're beginning now at a higher cost level when you're considering other things besides labor. So, why were cities magnets for population? Well, they're certainly efficient places for production due to economies of scale, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But also because there are, in many cities, particularly during the 19th century, increasing public works. There are public and private transportation networks that contribute to lowering costs for businesses. There's the ability to find a workforce more easily that lowers the cost of recruitment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are the agglomeration economies that I referred to before, and we run into these in Automobile, as I mentioned. We also run into them in Hollywood, where there are concentrations of filmmaking, on Wall Street, where there are concentrations of financial firms. One of the things that often happens is that we have knowledge spillovers, that we have firms sharing information with each other, and the spillover of knowledge from one firm to another as employees from a firm move to take jobs at another firm. One of the ways in which this has been emphasized in recent literature has been through the idea of industry clusters, which has been promoted by, among other people, Michael Porter in his book, The Competitive Advantage of Nations, and in his subsequent books. Industry clusters are a geographic concentration of related businesses, and Porter argues that such clusters, such as the biotech corridors in San Diego, the hospitals in Boston, the Silicon Valley outside San Francisco, that they reduce costs, that they increase innovation, and they help to stimulate new businesses. Now, second graph. This is a long-run average cost curve. And what is the story that is behind this? So this has several short-run average cost curves. And the story behind this one is one of changing your equipment, your supplies, your capital. Long run, as economists use it, is a period long enough for changes to occur in equipment, changes to occur in the size of the plant that you use, the facility that you use, etc. And the idea is that as you move to larger and larger equipment, to larger and larger size plant, that you can produce more efficiently. And so you move from one short-run average cost curve to another as you change the capital that you use, as you change the equipment, as you change the size of the plant. A good example of this to keep in mind is the idea of the production of electricity. If you are producing a relatively small amount, you can get away with using a small generator. If you're producing a bit more, then you want to buy a larger generator. And the larger generation will cost you a bit more, but your cost per unit of production will fall. If you want to produce even more, then you might want to get an even larger generator, perhaps one fueled by a diesel engine instead of a gasoline engine, et cetera, et cetera. And if you want to expand your production even more and use more and more electricity, then you may be talking about a nuclear power plant on a really large scale, or hydropower, or other things. The idea is that you are continuing, as you change your equipment, you're continuing to be able to produce at lower cost. Again, there are limits, and after a certain stage, the cost will begin to rise. The idea of economies of scale, the idea that with producing more output we can lower cost, is an essential idea behind what happens for various enterprises found in urban areas. For large manufacturing firms, for services that require a critical population mass, for example, department stores such as Marshall Field in Chicago, which was begun in the 19th century, or Macy's in New York City, that rely upon a certain volume of people coming in and shopping there. Museums, not everybody goes to a museum, but it's worthwhile to have a museum, even if a small percentage of your population goes there, if your population is large enough that percentage is meaningful, that percentage coming to the museum will be enough to provide the revenue needed to maintain it. Similarly, for Major League Sports, you need huge attendance to make the prices profitable. We pay our sports figures pretty well, and in order to make the whole enterprise profitable at a price that is affordable to the people who to the people who buy the service of watching the games, you have to have large numbers attending. Similarly, public transportation makes sense if there is a large population that is using it. Okay, final set of graphs here. This is the question we want to address right now. We talked about cities in general, as if all cities are alike, and of course they aren't. Cities have different types of characteristics. So one of the things that we need to address is where do different types of businesses locate, and what are some of the dynamics behind the growth of cities with different economic bases. For example, why are some cities based upon natural resources, while other cities are based on entertainment, are based on other things? This was the question that was posed by Alfred Weber and led to the construction of what we call Weber diagrams or Weber graphs, one of which you see here on the screen right now. Alfred Weber was the brother of Max Weber, who some of you may have heard about. Max Weber is a well-known sociologist and economist. He taught both in Europe. And his brother was particularly attracted to the issue of what happens with transportation costs. And Alfred Weber took this form of reasoning. Said in the industrial age, an economy based on manufacturing takes raw materials and turns them into finished goods to be sold to consumers. This is the basic idea of manufacturing. But the transportation of raw materials to the factory and the transportation of finished goods to their final consumers often involves significant cost. And so to the extent that these costs are important, we can think about some firms as being transportation cost-oriented firms. Firms for which the cost of transportation will be really important for their location decisions. Now, Weber said, well, we've got two types of transportation going on here. We have procurement costs and we have distribution costs. Procurement costs, he said, are the cost of distribution, are the cost of bringing raw materials to the firm. Distribution costs are the cost of taking finished products to the market. And he initiated these diagrams in which he postulated in ways that economists often did, a simple model where we have a resource site and we have a market. And procurement costs are the cost of taking things from the resource site to the market. So procurement costs increase as we travel longer distances to the market. This axis here refers to the distance between the resource site and the market. All of the points along this line are potential location points for a firm, according to this diagram. We have this only this two-dimensional representation of possibilities. And so if the firm locates here, for example, its procurement cost will be here, its distribution cost will be here, and the total of the procurement cost and the distribution cost will be this total cost amount. So while we have procurement costs increasing as we move from the resource site to the market, we have distribution costs increasing as we move from the market to the resource site. So for example, if we located at the resource site, the cost of distribution would be higher than if we located closer to the market. So we cover all of this within our textbook, and I don't want to go into too much detail with it. Let me summarize by saying that Alfred Marshall was another famous economist. Alfred Weber concluded that there are some types of firms for which it will be more profitable to locate near the resource site. Now, what are those types of firms, which he called materials-oriented firms or resource-oriented firms? They are firms for which the cost of procurement is greater than the cost of distribution. And so the cost minimizing points so transportation costs are minimized by locating the plant that is making the firm closer to the source of raw materials, using less cost to transport the raw materials than the cost to distribute the firm, to distribute the product. If